A young monarch of England stands up to propose a toast to the happy couple, but he never finishes his speech. As he lifts his drink, the 24-year-old king suddenly collapses to the floor, and shortly after, the king is dead. Was it poison? Was it a stroke? Or was it a rare genetic defect? The official line was that he drank himself to death, but poisoning also remains a credible explanation. He was an intimidating, vicious ruler who levied crushing taxes and made many political enemies. He was a man so vindictive that one of his first acts as king was to dig up his own brother's corpse and throw it into a swamp. He was the very last Danish monarch to rule over both England and Denmark. This is the story of King Harthacnut. Harthacnut was born around 1018 and was the son of King Canute the Great and his powerful second wife, Emma of Normandy. When Canute married Emma, they made an agreement that any son they had together would jump right to the front of the line for the throne, completely bypassing Canute's older children from his first wife, Elfgifu. This meant Harthacnut was born to be the undisputed ruler of the entire North Sea Empire that would be left behind by his father. Harthacnut didn't get to enjoy a comfortable, sheltered childhood in England. At just 8 years old, he was sent across the sea to Denmark to act as the future king. He was placed under the guidance of a powerful council led by his uncle, Earl Ulf, and was given the task of helping to protect the territory from Swedish or Norwegian attacks. Everything was going according to plan, until November 1035, when Canute the Great suddenly died. Harthacnut was supposed to immediately cross the sea to take the throne of England, but he was stuck. He was completely tied down in Denmark, desperately fighting off a rising military threat from King Magnus of Norway. His absence created a massive power vacuum within England, which was quickly filled by Harold Harefoot, Harthacnut's older half-brother from Canute's first marriage. To avoid a devastating civil war, the English nobles met at a great council in Oxford and came up with a fragile but messy compromise. They agreed that Harold would rule as a regent. Meanwhile, Queen Emma would wait in the southern capital of Winchester as she waited for her son to arrive. But Harold didn't want to be a temporary monarch. He marched south, seized the royal treasure, and used the wealth to buy the loyalty of the remaining nobles. Harold was then recognised as the rightful king of England, driving Queen Emma into exile. Harthacnut had managed to lose his entire English kingdom without even setting foot on its soil. With Harthacnut stuck in Denmark, Queen Emma decided to shift her allegiance to her two older sons from her first marriage to the previous English king, Athelred the Unready. She invited Edward and Alfred to come back to England from exile in Normandy to challenge Harold. But the plan turned into a complete disaster. Edward arrived at Southampton with a fleet of 40 Norman ships, but was immediately beaten back by Harold's forces. Prince Alfred was intercepted and captured by Earl Godwin, who delivered him to Harold's men and was then taken to the monastery of Ely and brutally blinded, dying shortly after from his wounds. With his rivals eliminated or scared off, Harold Harefoot was officially proclaimed King of England in 1037. But the brutal murder of Alfred would not be forgotten. When he received the news of his brother's horrific death, Harthacnut was livid, and this tragedy is what finally pushed the Danish king to prepare for a massive invasion of England. Back in Scandinavia, Harthacnut was still locked in a dangerous stalemate with King Magnus of Norway. But instead of fighting a mutually destructive war, the two kings met at a river and signed a peace treaty. They agreed that if either one of them died without a male heir, the surviving king would automatically inherit the other's kingdom. This completely neutralised the Norwegian threat, allowing Harthacnut to finally gather a massive invasion fleet of over 60 warships and prepare to sail west to take back England. But in March 1040, just as Harthacnut was finalising his invasion plans, Harold Harefoot suddenly died. Harthacnut then sailed into England completely unopposed. He had brought a conquering army, but he didn't have to fight a single battle, as he was immediately welcomed as the rightful king. When King Harthacnut finally arrived in England, he didn't bring forgiveness, he brought vengeance. His half-brother Harold had stolen his throne and murdered his brother Alfred. Harthacnut was so wrathful and vindictive that his very first act as king was to order Harold's dead body to be dug up from its tomb in Westminster. And he didn't send common grave robbers to do it. He forced the highest ranking men in the kingdom, including Earl Godwin, the Archbishop of York, and his own royal executioner, to personally drag out the corpse. They beheaded the dead king and threw his remains into a fen adjacent to the River Thames. The body was later secretly fished out of the river by a local fisherman and quietly reburied in a Danish cemetery in London. This wasn't just sibling rivalry, it was a gruesome, highly calculated statement of unkingship. Harold was the false king, and the true ruler of the North Sea Empire had returned. Harthacnut may have officially become king, but being the king is expensive. He had brought a massive invasion fleet with him, and those heavily armed sailors needed to be paid. He decided to tax the English people with a staggering, almost unbearable demand of more than £21,000 of silver, which in today's money is worth anything from £40 million to £100 million. In 1041, the citizens of Worcester decided they had finally had enough. On May the 4th, when two of the king's Danish tax collectors arrived in the city, the locals lured them into an upper chamber of the Abbey Tower and murdered them. Once again, Harthacnut responded with a vindictive anger. He ordered a massive army to march to Worcester, burn the city to the ground, and kill anyone they found. Fortunately, the citizens got an early warning and evacuated to a small island in the middle of the River Severn, where they built a makeshift fort. The king's army didn't bother attacking the island, but they spent 4 straight days looting and burning Worcester to ashes. On the 5th day, they marched away with their plunder, and the king's wrath was satisfied. Despite his iron-fisted, terrifying rule, Harthacnut had one major weakness: his failing health. He wasn't married, he had no children, and he suffered from severe chronic bouts of illness, which modern historians suspect may have been tuberculosis. Knowing his life expectancy was short, and realising that his sudden death would plunge the empire right back into a bloody civil war, Harthacnut made an incredibly wise move in 1041. He officially invited his older half-brother, Edward the Confessor, to return to England from exile in Normandy. He was officially received as a co-ruler and heir. By officially bringing Edward into the fold, Harthacnut guaranteed that power would transition peacefully, saving the country from another bloodbath. Their mother, Queen Emma, was so thrilled to have both her surviving sons safely in power that she commissioned a lavish book of political propaganda. The book deliberately painted Emma, Harthacnut and Edward as a divine trinity of rulers. On the 8th of June in 1042, Harthacnut attended a grand high society wedding in Lambeth, near London. As the 24-year-old king stood up to drink a toast to the happy couple, he suddenly fell to the ground with an awful convulsion. Those nearby rushed to grab him, but he never spoke another word and died shortly after. But what was it that actually killed him? The official line was that he essentially drank himself to death and suffered a massive stroke. Poisoning also remains a highly credible explanation. Modern scientists have even proposed a third theory, that he and up to 14 other Danish royals may have suffered from Brugada syndrome, an inherited genetic disorder that causes sudden irregular heartbeats that can be fatal. Harthacnut's sudden death paved the way for his half-brother to peacefully take the throne as King Edward the Confessor, but this meant it was the official end of Danish rule in England, and the huge North Sea Empire that his father fought so hard to create vanished forever. For centuries, the history books, heavily influenced by the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, painted Harthacnut as a greedy, cruel tyrant who did nothing worthy of a king. But he did possess some of the key attributes necessary for a successful medieval king. He was a harsh, ruthless and often feared ruler, but his peace treaty with Norway was a sign that he could be diplomatic. And by bringing Edward back, he inadvertently set the stage for the Norman conquest of 1066. So what do you think? Was Harthacnut a cruel tyrant, or exactly the kind of strong ruler the 11th century needed? Let me know in the comments below. If you learned something new today, A thumbs up and a subscribe is the best way to support the channel. And if you enjoyed this story, I think you'll like this one right here. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you over there.